Hello and welcome back to the Lucid Dreaming podcast. This is episode 27, and today I have an interview with Daniel Love, who is a lucid dreaming practitioner, longtime practitioner and researcher, and author of a fairly known book called Are You Dreaming? And an interesting guy all around who's involved in all sorts of lucid dreaming projects and related projects. And I think I've known about him for a while, but haven't really dug into his material or spoken to him until now that he launched his Kickstarter project, which we will discuss on the episode, on the interview. And I think he's a fascinating guy, and I really enjoyed this chat, and I think you will as well. I think it made for a really interesting conversation about a variety of nuances in this topic and this endeavor of ours. Before I get to the interview, just a few little updates. I was interviewed myself on Meaning of Life TV, which is a website that has video interviews with all sorts of people about all sorts of subjects. You can guess by the title, Meaning of Life TV, that the type of stuff that's on there. I obviously was talking about lucid dreaming. If you want to check that out, I'll put the link in the show notes, but you can go to meaningoflife.tv/videos/34445. And that's about it. Let's get on with the interview. Today on the show, I have with me a special guest, Daniel Love, who is, and fill me in here if I'm missing anything, but for the most part, you're a lucid dreaming longtime practitioner and researcher and author of a relatively known book in this community, Are You Dreaming? And welcome to the show, Daniel.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've had a few people on Twitter and elsewhere kind of suggest to have you on the show, and I was always sort of aware of you in the background, but I haven't read your book, as I told you, but I've known about your website and read some articles. I'm wondering if you can fill me in on the rest of sort of what you do, or maybe a little bit of background. You don't have to get into too much detail, but your background with lucid dreaming and how you got into it.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I do tend to keep in the background. I've never been a big fan of the whole idea of lucid dreaming experts or standing on a podium and preaching to people. I consider myself just a passionate lucid dreamer like yourself, and I think we all should have an equal platform here. So that's the approach I prefer to take, because it's such a massive field, and we really need to work together and just accept that it's still very much in its infancy, and take it from there. Work as a sort of hive mind, as it were, to get to the bottom of it. As for my own background, I started lucid dreaming very early in life. I was unfortunate enough to suffer from terrible parasomnias, such as sleepwalking, awful nightmares, as a very young child. So lucid dreaming, I wouldn't say it came naturally, but it was a bit of a battle. It was my defense mechanism for fighting these terrible experiences. But from there on, I just, obviously, once you master lucid dreaming, for want of a better term, I'm not sure whether one can ever truly master lucid dreaming, it became somewhat of an addiction, and I just had to throw myself fully into it. So
Yeah.
Initially, once I was an adult, I sort of went the path of teaching workshops, and possibly a little egotistical. I think a lot of people who first get into this want to sort of be the one to tell everyone about lucid dreaming and become quite evangelical. But I found that rather tedious in its own way, because you're just repeating yourself. You're saying the same things over and over again, and it all becomes a bit of an ego trip. And I sort of, fortunately, grew out of that quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think at a time before the internet, or at least before this topic on the internet really took off in recent years, I think a bunch of us were some of the few people that people knew that had some sort of regular lucid dreaming, spontaneous or an active practice when we were you're just looking for the few books out there that were doing it, and
Yeah,
it's hard not to want to tell people about this
of course, of
when
course.
they can't look it up somewhere, or have heard of it from some reference or movie or pop culture thing or something.
Yeah, I mean, times have changed so very much since the days of the Lucidity Institute forums and Nightlight magazine and all of
Yeah,
those things. It's now it's quite hard to find someone who doesn't know what lucid dreaming is, which I think is a great thing. But at the same time, it comes with its own darker side, with all of the pseudoscience and less palatable aspects that seem to have latched onto the subject,
yeah,
which is perhaps something we can talk about later. Because one of my main ambitions really is to try and clean the topic up slightly and be a bit of a voice of dissent when it comes to the over spiritualization of lucid dreaming, which I feel is not really in the best interest of the subject. I'm not against people following sort of philosophical tangents or their own spiritual path, but I think it's best to keep that private and to have that as your own private practice rather than make lucid dreaming about spirituality, because it essentially isn't. So,
yeah. I mean, that's a really tough one because I sort of separate, or I try to separate the various. I don't even know if I say just paranormal, it doesn't really cover it.
yeah,
And maybe new age or new agey stuff is a bigger umbrella that covers a bunch of it.
yeah,
And yet there's spirituality, which is a problematic word, at the very least,
yeah,
but has something to it in terms of, there's just not a better word for it, unfortunately,
yeah.
that
I mean,
covers a. Yes, sorry, go
sorry,
on.
sorry, I'm interrupting. I agree completely. I think the word I tend to lean towards is, rather than use spirituality, I prefer to use the word philosophy. I don't know whether that's any better or whether it's just playing with
Yeah.
semantics, but
I would
I,
consider philosophy mostly a cognitive conceptual sort of, let's say, frameworks
yeah,
in conceptualizing or thinking about something, although philosophy can lead to practicality and action, but
yeah,
spiritual, or at least where spirituality comes in terms of just mindfulness, meditation, states of consciousness, and so on, is a more experiential component of
yeah,
it,
yeah. I would agree with that.
and that's where I would separate
Yeah,
those. So, when did you write your book? I'm curious. When did that come out?
I believe it was in 2013. I have a memory like a sieve for these things, so let me just double check. Yeah, 2013 was the 1st of January, um,
Yeah, so that
which was,
that's already when a lot of the material was out there in the world. So,
oh yeah.
so I'm curious: is there, how would you position that, or say what's in the book that's slightly different? Because I can tell you're always trying to go for the non-standard regurgitated approach. Um,
It's difficult, isn't it? Because there are certain things that have to be repeated,
right.
um, which is unfortunate, but that's just the way the world works. So if you want to educate people, you need to give them the
Yeah,
basics.
unless you're writing only for people who are already experienced, which is very limited,
Yeah,
then
and
you
it's
have to repeat it.
that's something I'd like to get into, but I think we're not quite large enough in numbers yet to be
Yep.
viable as a project. But the angle with Are You Dreaming was really, well, it was a lifelong goal really to get this book out there. And the problem, like we've just touched on, I've always had is this sort of marriage of lucid dreaming with spirituality, which, just to reiterate, I'm not against, but I've just, as someone who's a bit more scientifically minded, I've always sort of skimmed through books before buying them. And
Hmm.
you see the chapter titles of telepathy and dreams and all of these things. And each time I see that in the book, I'm like, I want to read this, but this really makes me not want to buy it. So I wanted to give people who were more like me something which they could read, which wouldn't rub them up the wrong way, and
Right.
just broaden the audience for lucid dreaming, because it's easy for us to forget in our world of lucid dreaming that for people outside of it, it can still be quite a flaky new age subject.
Hmm.
And I think it would be nice to widen its appeal and just make it a little more accessible.
Yeah. I was tempted at some point to start using the word the the term conscious dreaming as opposed to lucid dreaming,
Yeah,
just for maybe removing some of the stigma. But it's hard. I mean, it's so cemented as lucid dreaming, and I like the word lucid, but
yeah.
for some people, it brings a connotation of new age, weird, woo woo
It
stuff.
it's difficult. And I think it's just something we have to live with, but probably the best thing we can do is just to add a bit of weight to the other side of the scales so that things balance out because it is a deeply profound experience and one which lends itself to spiritual thought. But at the same time, it can be used very practically and or just even simply for entertainment or for those who are interested in how their minds work. The I think my approach really would be if people want to talk about spirituality or their beliefs, I don't have a problem with that as long as they make it clear that what they're talking about is a speculation or a belief. It's when you start picking up books and they start saying dream telepathy is a real thing, or um,
Yeah.
then that's frustrating because you know bring the facts to the table, give us your evidence, and then start to make those claims. But don't just tell people outright. I mean, partly my issue with this is as a teenager, and I think a lot of teenagers go through this, you're so hungry for knowledge about the world, and the the metaphysical aspects of life seem so very appealing. They're so exciting. I mean, if they were true, what could be a more exciting field to get into?
Yeah.
And I think there's a danger, and it happened to me briefly, of being drawn into those subjects and just kind of wasting a lot of mental energy. And I almost feel like some of the books I've read in the past have been a form of theft. It's sort of stolen, an intellectual form of theft where my time has been stolen, and I could have invested that in studying a subject with foundations in reality. I know I'm going to rub up people the wrong way with this, but it's just
No, I'm totally with you. That's the thing, and it makes it hard because of I have such a big interest in lucid dreaming, and there are so many books and like pop-up shops of suddenly another person writes a blog and another
yeah,
person writes a book, and I know that I'm sort of I don't know if guilty of that, but one of those people that suddenly show up out of nowhere and starts writing or podcasting about the subject.
yeah,
I've mentioned it so many times throughout the podcast. I only try to do something that's at least relatively new or has some angle that's interesting that hasn't been explored yet,
yeah,
and keeping it in a realm of science. But it prevents me from picking up another lucid dreaming book because of so many times where I bought another one, and halfway through it I just why am I reading this?
yeah, yeah.
It's a waste of time
And also, I suppose the problem when you're sort of
when you know the subject.
yeah, well, when you know the subject and when you're known in the field, there you become part of a clique in a way. There's, I mean, you've probably come across this. There's various sections of the higher ranks of
Yeah.
lucid dreaming authorities who share certain beliefs and they
Yeah.
tend to look out for each other. And it's it's human nature, I suppose, an evolutionary trait to want to be part of the pack, and thus it kind of makes you give in and sort of lessen your stance ever so slightly. And I've been guilty of this. I found myself being involved in projects which, when I step back, I think, should I be doing this? Is this am I helping promote lucid dreaming as a subject in its own right, or am I pushing it in the wrong direction? And every time I catch myself doing that, I try to correct it or step back.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's hard to sort of tell in advance. I'm thinking of the example of the movie, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but is very problematic in this sense. What the bleep do we know? And they interviewed scientists talking about science, and then within the movie, they frame it in all sorts of different ways to imply different things that may or may not be true,
yeah,
many of which probably aren't true. And there's at least one of the scientists I know has regretted, being on the movie, and later realized that how the whole interview was framed, and it's really
Yeah.
hard to know in advance in some of these cases. But I totally hear you. It's something to sort of look out for. I don't think it's too bad. I mean, I don't know. Lucid dreaming is not that big of a field quite yet, where there's more cases of it, but there's plenty of from events talking about a wide range of um, paranormal stuff or spiritual stuff or astral projections and all those things, to more benign variations. But I get it. I wanted to just ask you about something, because I for some reason I haven't come across until preparing for this podcast. Something that I now just read and found interesting in your work is the cycle adjustment technique.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to give a quick rundown of that?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple technique, really. I think it sounds a lot more complicated than the reality of the practice. The idea really is just that the majority of techniques focus around psychological preparation, such as all-day awareness, these sorts of things. And I'm a big believer that a lot of lucid dreaming is has a biological or neurological basis. So we're kind of just pushing our bodies out of synchronization with what they should be doing, and that creates sort of a burst of awareness where it wouldn't have been otherwise.
Hmm.
Um, so the cycle adjustment technique is really a means to achieve that. So the basic principle is you would, for say a week, wake up 90 minutes earlier than you usually would, just to sort of adjust your sleep cycle so that that becomes your standard pattern.
Hmm.
And then following that week, you alternate between the earlier waking and waking at your later time. The point is there that during the time on the days where you sleep in later, your mind is going to be more alert. It's kind of I mean, it's very similar to Wake Back to Bed, really, just with
Yeah.
the addition of this cycle shift. The the ti- the
Yeah. That's very interesting.
the time scales and the timing used in my book and on the internet is really just a suggestion. It's not set in stone. Most of the things I suggest, I just want people to start experimenting with. So I don't think there's any clear cut answers as to what the right way to do these things are. And hopefully, if more and more people try an experiment and we get feedback on what people find as effective,
Yeah.
then we can slowly sort of hone in on what's the correct approach. But I think it's useful to, especially with, say, the advent of the chemicals such as galantamine, which prove to us that lucid dreaming has this biological basis.
Hmm.
I mean, if you can take a pill, change your brain chemistry, and that makes lucidity all the more easier, then that's a big
Yeah,
implication.
yeah. For me, that was always somewhat obvious, even before galantamine, in terms of, again, my fascination with the brain led me to the conclusion, and I know we can't sort of just reduce brain states and brain chemistry to subjective states of consciousness, but there's always correlation. It's all at the bottom a matter of brain functions, and I think that even when we're just tricking ourselves or using prospective memory or wake back to bed, is we're making adjustments to how the brain works in order to trigger lucidity, in a sense.
Yeah,
And I think, and I do, and that's actually the reason why I believe that technology will eventually sort of make techniques obsolete, and that's controversial or not. That's my belief at the moment.
yeah,
And I think that it sounds like the cycle adjustment technique is an interesting approach, because I've heard people have success with things like dream rebound,
yeah,
and again, the more disruptive it is for sleep, the less sustainable technique is.
yeah,
This one sounds very interesting. Like, it doesn't you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night or things like that. But I do also believe, And this is one of the fascinating things about techniques and supplements and all those things, that it, as far as I can tell from all these years of sort of reading and talking to people, nothing works 100% for everyone, or in a larger degree for everyone.
Yeah.
Even things that are as relatively reliable for a lot of people, like galantamine, don't work for some people at all,
Yeah.
myself included, by the way.
Oh,
But
really?
I know that they work for many, many other people. Yes. Why, I don't know. Probably the explanation is brain chemistry. Whatever my brain chemistry setup is, just either doesn't work with it, or maybe it needs different quantity, or maybe something else is getting involved that it's just throwing it off for some reason.
Yeah.
Who knows? It'll be interesting to figure this out one day somehow. But
Yeah. I completely agree with all of those points. I think that there's a tendency, especially in forums and, well, throughout the entire field of these things, to obsess on technique.
yeah.
It's kind of it's almost a bit of a disease of the lucidity enthusiast. I mean, the amount of new techniques ending in "ild." We've worked through the alphabet so many times already.
Yeah, I
It,
make fun of that all the time. So thanks for adding a cat in there. So that's kind of
yeah.
nice.
I wanted to go a different angle with that one. Um,
Good move.
but yeah, I really think that. I mean, I've been rereading Saint Denis
Hmm.
and his dreams and the means to direct them, and it's fascinating seeing this early pioneer of lucid dreaming and how he approached the subject. And I mean, essentially, the basis for his entire practice was simply to record and observe. And within a very short period of time, his dream recall was pretty much perfect. I think it was 179 days of recording his dreams until he had perfect recall,
Nice.
and then 202 days of this practice, he had his first lucid dream. And 15 months later, following this just continuous recall and observation, just developing a relationship with his dreams, he then had perfect lucidity. Um, and I mean, that's what we all look for, really. I mean,
Yeah, I've been trying to scream this from the rooftops and telling everybody two aspects about dream recall and dream journaling
yeah,
in the service of dream recall, is that if you can only do if you're getting into lucid dreaming and you're overwhelmed by all the techniques and things and that, if you do only one thing, write down your dreams, improve your dream recall.
yeah,
And that, even if you want to do techniques, you should do that to create a basis for the techniques to actually work.
yeah,
And the second thing is my theory, it sounds like more people are validating this, is that if you just write down your dreams and increase dream recall to a certain degree, at some point you'll just naturally cross over to lucidity, because all lucidity is, and as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I can tell, is just dream awareness. And the more awareness you have, it just, at some point, it's not like a hard line, but at some point you sort of cross into the spectrum of metacognition and conscious awareness in dreams, and you become lucid naturally just by having increased awareness, which is why I think also mindfulness meditation helps and works. But I know at least a few people that all they did was increase dream recall by writing down their dreams, and they started spontaneously lucid dreaming more and more frequently.
yeah. I think I would add to that just writing down the dreams wouldn't be quite enough. It's
Reflection?
the familiarity. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
So because what you're doing is you're building a relationship with your dreaming mind. You're just understanding how that world works, and the difference is how
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to write down your dreams without doing that, but consciously doing that to a larger degree can probably help. Um,
yeah,
and of course, from that springs so many other things of starting to notice patterns in your dreams and all the little nuances that come from actually writing and reading and thinking about the content of your dreams. That's very cool.
I think the problem most people have with this is it's hard work,
Yep.
and probably quite, well, not probably, we both know it's quite a boring task to wake up in the middle of the night and jot down what you've just been dreaming, and it goes against everything you want to do because you're
Yeah.
all you want to do is just pull the covers over your head and go back to sleep. But
Have you looked into or experimented with writing versus recording your dreams? Audio versus.
I I do both. I tend to record just because it's so much easier to have a voice
Yeah.
recorder by the side of the bed. And then what I'll do is I'll go over those in the morning and write them down. I think there's something to be said for both approaches. I don't know whether I'd say I'd have a preference for one or the other, which is why I combine them. But it's nice to be able to sit back and read through your dream journals years later and just remind yourself of something
Yeah,
that
for
happened to you.
sure, for sure. And again, I'm a big fan of the searchability of writing down digitally. Although I know that people are saying even for students learning in school or something to write down notes helps with memory. So I've always wondered if there's a if that is not a myth and that is actually true, but also if that affects dream recall and dream awareness when you're writing down your dreams with a pen and paper. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I mean, I can't give anything more than anecdotal uh, experience on this, but my ability to write the the written word versus the typed word, um, the quality and the style of my writing are two very different things depending on which I choose. Uh, Personally, I prefer what I write when it's typed, but it's interesting that there is a difference, and I wonder why that is. I mean, it would be fascinating to know more about that, and
Yeah.
um, I might actually look into see if there's any studies that have been done, but there are none that I've made myself aware of yet. So.
Well, I wanted to ask you a little about just plenty I still want to get into, but I know that you were sort of consulting with Finite Films on Anamnesis, which is if anybody listening and haven't seen the web series, it's fantastic, and I'll link to it in the show notes again. I had them on the podcast. Fantastic group of guys that did a
Yeah, they're great.
just a remarkable job with it. So how'd
Yeah.
you get involved, and what was that like?
I think it's quite a while ago now, so I'm just trying to remember how we made contact. I think we
Was Arthur? I think Arthur was connecting people, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know.
it could well have been that we were both running Kickstarters at similar times, um, and I think we sort of connected via that platform. And yeah, so it was obviously mutually beneficial for both of us to be sort of working together.
Were you doing the translating dreams thing, or were you involved in that? Was that yours?
Yeah, that was translating dreams. That was back when I wanted to get Sandini's book translated into English. Which, on a side note, for anyone who's interested, it's just been completed, and you can download it from my website, which is exploringluciddreams.com.
Cool.
Um, a guy whose name I hesitate to say because I can never pronounce it, even though we communicate so often online. Carlos Dumblanken. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's, I'm terrible with foreign names. But he was incredibly well. He's an incredibly passionate man when it comes to the work of Saint-Denis. And after the Translating Dreams project wasn't successful, we discussed just how important it was to have a full translation, and he decided to take on the challenge himself. And being retired, he had enough time to sort of
Mm.
put into that, and he's just completed it. He's done an absolutely amazing job considering that neither English or French are his mother tongue, and he's offering it for free. So it's a free download from either mine or his website. And also, over the course of the next year or so, I'm going to tidy up his translation because there's a few little bits in there which could do with tweaking, and have it printed as a paperback for those who aren't so keen on ebooks. So that's all to come as well, which is quite exciting.
Very cool.
And it's a fascinating read. I mean, I think anyone who is genuinely interested in lucid dreaming should read Saint-Denis' work, because he was forgotten after his death,
Mm.
and people like Freud took over and took the whole subject of dreaming down what I personally feel was the wrong path. And if Saint-Denis had taken his place, if his work had been the basis for modern dream research, I think we'd be in a very different place and far more advanced than we are at the moment.
Very interesting. I'm curious to read it, and I'll link to it in the show notes.
But you were asking something else. It was anamnesis. That was right. So essentially, they were very passionate about making a show which was as close to the true experience of lucid dreaming as possible, and I offered to help them to do that. And just it was all done online, obviously being on different sides of the pond.
yeah,
And they'd send me the scripts and sort of ideas, and I just check through them and send them back what I believed would be good corrections. Um, Obviously, allowing for artistic uh, freedom, but they were very receptive, and it was interesting to see tiny details, those little details hidden throughout the show, which unless you're a lucid dreamer, and even if you are, you probably may still not notice them. But I would recommend anyone who's watched it to go watch it again, and just maybe not focus so much on the story, just focus on the environment and see what's going on. There's lots to pick up on. It's quite
yeah,
they've been very good with
it's
it.
really really well made in a variety of ways, and it's worth even watching the preceding short film that sort of launched the series.
Ah, yeah, well, yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, it's really
It's such a shame that it hasn't been picked up, and I think at this point, from what they've mentioned, they're not planning to take it any further, which is a shame. And maybe we should all email them and beg them to do more, because I think it really deserves to be
we need to
turned into a full series.
email Netflix and tell them to pick this up.
Yeah, yeah.
They've been
I mean,
funding some really good projects, so who knows?
yeah, and I mean they did such a stellar job on such a small budget. It was, uh,
The cinematography is just remarkable. I keep being flabbergasted by it, and it's just amazing
yeah,
what they did in such a short
but
amount of time.
yeah, it was wonderful to be involved, and they're such lovely guys that they deserve to do very very well for themselves. And I wish them all the best, and I hope that whatever projects they work on, they go on to do very well with.
I have very little doubt that they did, that they will. There's just
Yeah,
really really good craftsmanship in terms of
yeah,
video. So I mentioned Arthur briefly, who's just an internet friend and friend of the show, and someone who interacts often with both technology community and spirituality and lucid dreaming
yeah,
and VR and so on. And he's the one who suggested to bring you on the podcast, and he also suggested a question, I guess something that you've talked about previously somewhere, about the relationship between lucid dreaming and virtual reality, which I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think there's a lot of connection, and it's a fascinating topic. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that a little bit.
yeah. I mean, there's not a great deal that can be said at this point, unfortunately. I share his passion for this subject, and it's one of the things I want to explore in the Kickstarter project I'm running at the moment.
Hmm.
Um, but it's virtual reality. It's still so much in its infancy that we have no idea how it's going to impact on the dream lives of its users.
Yeah, I'll
I mean,
I
oh,
can give
sorry.
you my take, and you can tell me what you think.
Yeah,
So there's two main components that I've been thinking about. One is that I've started describing lucid dreaming, at least to some people, as I say, imagine virtual reality 50 or 100 years into the future.
yeah, yeah,
So we lost the goggles. It's either straight to the brain or something on the retina or something, and it's full body suit, and it's just full immersion, photorealistic, with EEG brain control over the environment, and you create it in real time. So imagine like VR from the far future. That's what lucid dreaming already is today to a large degree, minus the
yeah,
stability.
yeah,
But
yeah, and much more than that as well. I mean,
yeah,
I can't see virtual reality ever quite matching the. Oh, I'm not quite sure what the word would be. It's so direct.
psychological component.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or just it. I mean, you're dealing with the organ you use to perceive reality, which is then forming a new reality and handing it back to you. So you, no one knows you better than your own brain, and unless unless we have some kind of system which can preempt that, or you download your knowledge base into the system, I can't see at least not for a very long time, virtual reality matching that.
Well, I think, and this is definitely far, far into the future, but at some point we will get like the book Nexus, which is a fantastic sci-fi book by Ramez Naam, is when we get to a level where it's, I don't know, like nanobots
Yeah,
hooking up to your neurons, then basically, and sort of input output, it both reads from your brain and redirects back to your brain,
yeah.
might have a sort of feedback loop that has the type of interaction that you can produce in a lucid dream. But of course, that's, who knows at what point we'll get to that.
So yeah, it's a shame we won't live to see such technologies. It's because it's so exciting. Um, but we have that technology now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's the biggest pitch for lucid dreaming, which is the second part, that I think that virtual reality might actually end up being a good sell, or a good, or a gateway sort of glimpse into lucid dreaming,
Yeah,
because the craze that seems to happening, the reemergence of the enthusiasm for virtual reality, I think the reasons people are interested in VR are very much, at least in large part, the same reasons that people want to lucid dream.
yeah,
They want a virtual environment uh, where they can experience the unimaginable,
yeah.
in a sense.
It's I think part of human nature. I mean, we're storytellers, and we love a good story. We have done since the dawn of our species. And lucid dreaming, virtual reality, these are just such an old instinct, just expressing itself with the latest technology. Or um,
Yeah.
and I mean, one thing I can see happening relatively soon with virtual reality are, say, for example, dealing with people with repetitive nightmares.
Hmm.
It would be very easy to recreate via virtual reality the nightmare environment that this person is experiencing, and to
They're already working on
oh,
that.
they really, oh, okay, that's, you'll have to
Yeah.
send me some information on that. I'm not aware of that. Well, that's, yeah, well, there we go. Someone's beat me to the idea. Damn it. Always happens.
No, it's great, and it's such a logical thing to do,
Yeah,
and it's obviously one of the reasons I want to make lucid dreaming, or help somehow make lucid dreaming more commonplace and more easy to achieve.
yeah,
Um, there's so much that can be done with such environments.
yeah. I think,
Yeah, it's a fascinating, endless topic.
yeah, I mean, I think the danger, which is something I've touched on a few times, is just that virtual reality will be so much easier to experience that it may siphon off a large portion of people who would have been interested in lucid dreaming, who want to go down the sort of push button instant gratification route, which is completely
Well,
understandable.
yeah, yeah. Except that there's a interesting phenomena, that I've noticed in two places. One, there's this the on Reddit. There's a subreddit for the Oculus Rift, which is the VR goggles,
Yeah,
by Oculus, and people have, and I know it's also anecdotal, but I've seen a few people ask suddenly, the community, hey, does anybody who've been using the development kit have started lucid dreaming? I think being immersed in this sort of virtual environment has triggered some aspect of increased lucidity, and I think that there's maybe a possible connection, and there's been a study about video games and increased
yeah,
lucidity that seems to be a connection. So there might be something here that would actually, strictly from the use of VR, will at least for some, facilitate a more frequent lucidity.
yeah. I've heard the same sorts of things, and I think possibly it's giving people an experience of a different reality. The fact that they can have more than just one reality. Once your mind opens to that possibility,
Yeah.
if maybe it's a natural side effect to then notice that dreams are also a different reality, and perhaps it's as simple as that. Just this concept that as a human being, we're now able to experience multiple realities.
Yeah.
So
I was wondering if, in part, it's being immersed for several hours sometimes in a visual experience of looking at your body running around from the third person perspective, which is very common in dreams, lucid or otherwise,
Yeah.
and getting used to that experience, and then more instantly recognizing it when it happens in a dream. But who knows? I mean, there's
Yeah.
just so much to explore
Possibly.
there. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up because I've never once experienced a third person dream,
Really?
which is yeah, it's not been part of my dream experience at all.
That's
So,
fascinating. They are the vast majority of my dreams.
oh really? Are you
Yes.
a big gamer? Do you game a lot? Is that
I
possibly a
was as a kid, and I haven't for the longest time, and now I'm getting back into games. Um, but my dreams have often been, for the most part, at least more than 50% for sure, third person perspective, and they fluctuate and alternate between first person and third person, especially in lucid dreams, but not always.
that's really fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, and here's another.
It's always wonderful when you meet someone who has a totally different experience of the same thing.
Right, right. And this is part of what is fascinating to me about this concept that I've been thinking about, and the reason why your Kickstarter campaign, which we'll get to right now, is very intriguing to me, because I've always wanted, and I wasn't even sure how that would look, but to try to map the occurrence or the world of lucid dreaming in some sense of trying to figure out what the mechanisms are, how it works within the experience itself. I mean, what's possible and not possible, if there is such a thing as not possible. People have started looking at how time works
Yeah,
in a lucid dream, and all these kinds of things. I was hoping that we can sort of map the arena, the world of lucid dreaming experientially.
yeah.
And when I saw your Kickstarter campaign, I've had lots of questions, but at least it sounded like that might be a partial component from it.
It,
So,
it's
do
it's
you want to tell me about the the new book and the campaign and everything you're
yeah. It's I
doing?
mean it's probably insanely ambitious, but the basic it's called the Lucid Dreamer's Guide to the Cosmos, and essentially the name kind of sums up what the angle I'm taking here, which is rather than be books just based around lucid dreaming, it's going to be a series of books, ideally ongoing from now until I can't write any longer, which will each take a segment of our experience of reality, of one particular topic. So it could be virtual reality, it could be biology, philosophy, time or time travel, and anything you can think of, really, which is a topic that's of interest. And then uh, it's really hard to put this in a nutshell. It's kind of hard to explain. Um,
I can ask some leading questions about this because um, again, you say some things like, it's exploring space, time, consciousness, reality, microbiology, philosophy, and more. And the book topics includes virtual reality, mindfulness, the solar system, the natural world. Um, so how does microbiology, for example, tie into this? What would that even look like
well,
in
to,
terms
to
of
take a really
lucid
a
dreaming?
really simple a really simple example would be, well, actually, it jumps back to the work of Saint Denis in a way, which he was a strong believer that you couldn't dream of anything that you hadn't experienced in the waking world, which I'm not completely on board with that idea, but I think there's some truth to it. I think that our dream experiences are a creative mixing of experiences we've already had. So
Hmm.
if you take that idea further, then our dreams are built from our knowledge, our experiences, etc. So if one develops knowledge in a certain area, then you're giving your mind more to work with. Your dreams can become more complicated, more true to reality, and you're just expanding your mind. So with the microbiology topic, a large section of that particular book would explore sort of microbial worlds and just the science behind that. And as we're doing that, we will be looking into how you could experience that as a lucid dreamer. So I'm not sure whether I'm making myself perfectly clear here, but it's I want to put people's minds into that world
I see.
so that they can then rebuild that world in the full three-dimensional virtual reality space of lucid dreaming. and it be accurate.
So you want to give them the material to build lucid dreams from.
Yeah,
Ah,
and that's one aspect of it,
okay.
but that's sort of the basic principle behind the series. But I want to take it further than that as well. So um, it's going to be quite an evolving project because I want to work with the community of dreamers to. So I don't want to be, like I said at the very beginning of our conversation, I don't want to put myself on a pedestal and tell people what to do. I'd rather just be a conduit for other people's ideas to come through.
Hmm.
So I'll be working with forums such as Dreamviews and Reddit just to get other people and their experiences in the books, and even have sort of guest writers and just work with scientists in different fields and just try and get as much in there as possible. Sort of break away from the whole this is a book on how to lucid dream
Right,
and then leave it up to the person to work out what to do next.
right.
It would be nice to have this community idea of what can we explore and then use the funding from these books to invest in research and promoting things further. And one silly thing that I want to do, just to sort of shake or rock the boat of lucid dreaming as well, is to invite everyone who claims to be a lucid dreaming expert into a sleep laboratory
Oh, I love this.
and have them recorded having a lucid dream under laboratory conditions. Just because we have no way of testing this at the moment, and anyone can put themselves out there saying I lucid dream every night, and how do we know? Really, how do
I
we know?
wonder. I
And
wonder how many people would agree to do it. But
that would be very telling in itself, wouldn't it? It would be fascinating, and I think it's important. I mean, it's worrying because none of us can 100% guarantee we'll have a lucid dream on a given night, but um, I think it would be interesting. I think it would be a fun thing to do.
yeah, I mean, in some people's defense, it's and I know this that it's harder to perform in a lab, not in your bed, and with wires coming out of your head.
Yeah, yeah,
But with a few tries in real expertise, it's supposed to be doable.
yeah.
But I like this interesting weird idea of like the James Randi challenge for lucid dreamers.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's a little bit silly, but I just think it would be a nice way to draw a bit of attention to the field. I think
Yeah.
the news outlets around the world would be fascinated by this, which would then further promote the topic.
Well, I mean, I think the benefit of having the quote unquote experts, or at least the really well versed dreamers, lucid dreamers, in a lab, is that it's still hard for researchers to actually get recorded dreams, lucid dreams in a lab.
Yeah,
And that alone, I mean, I would want the people who can do this pretty much on demand to volunteer their time for the sake of this of lucid dreaming science, and
yeah,
that would be amazing because there's growing interest in the scientific community with lucid dreaming. It's fantastic.
absolutely. I mean, just running the Kickstarter, I've already had well a lot of emails from people around the world who their experience and their ability to lucid dream is fascinating. I mean, there are some people who are claiming to be able to sort of enter wilds virtually at the drop of a hat. It would be fascinating to get them into labs and sort of get them
Yeah,
using their skills for something better than just their own entertainment. Um, but the whole principle of the Lucid Dreamer's Guide to the Cosmos is it's a series of books exploring the cosmos through the eyes of a lucid dreamer in order to promote and invest into the subject. So I don't want it to be it's going to be a circular thing. The money that goes into the books goes back into lucid dreaming. Um, I'm a relatively frugal human being. I enjoy a simple life, and I'm happy to write, and I'm happy to invest all of my time into promoting and advancing lucid dreaming. And I can do that on a shoestring.
yeah.
And I would just like to help the community sort of find a cohesion and something to get behind, and just push the whole thing in a really positive direction rather than sort of the endless cycle that we've got of the moment at
Yeah.
the moment of the new experts telling you how to do the basics, and then a few years later someone else pops up, the same thing happens again with a different flavor, and it's it gets boring, and I understand that there's always going to be people coming to the subject needing to learn from scratch, but at the same time, there are thousands of us who want to be exploring this much deeper.
Yeah, I get a bunch of emails either asking if people can come on the podcast to talk or
Yeah,
if I can promote their new website about lucid dreaming and or just my opinion about their website and read and let them know what I think. And I always say, if you don't if you don't feel that you're actually contributing something new, ask yourself why write the same thing.
yeah,
And are you helping yourself and are you helping others in that? But let me just see that I understand the whole Kickstarter project correctly.
yeah,
So it is to basically launch the series of books via the first book. So the campaign is to in order to create the first book, which will actually is not a predefined, completely set thing, but a process of sort of bringing in all this information, putting it together.
yeah. It'll be a completely interactive process. I really, like I say, I want to be the conduit. I'll put my own slant into it, and I'll be the sort of bandmaster, as it were. But that's it. The community will be the musicians playing the music of the book, and I shall just be trying to keep it all in time and getting it out there for people.
Yeah, I think I'm getting the concept much better now, definitely. And even on the Kickstarter page, the concept of a Carl Sagan or Alan Watts like approach to this subject is definitely right up my alley. So I like that.
You can understand that it's such a broad sort of goal that it's quite hard to define in simple terms, and the nature of a Kickstarter page, you have to sort of
Yeah.
condense things into very simple concepts. And if you saw the first draft of the page, you'd laugh. It was 10 times longer, and people I ran it by just laughed at me. So I've tried to condense a very complicated and big ambitious project into a simple explanation, but hopefully this podcast will go some way to give people an idea.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, writer's gonna write, so
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
help themselves. When Mike, friend of the show and the person I interviewed last episode, and one of the writers on lucidstage.com, he found out you're coming on the podcast and send in a couple of questions that I wanted to run by you because,
Yeah, sure.
again, it's a little more nuanced look at some of these things. So I think you said also about the first book, and this relates to the campaign, that it will include and obviously every time you have a first book in a thing about lucid dreaming, you still have to include the guides and the usual rundowns. So it says it'll include an in-depth guide to mastering the skills of lucid dreaming way beyond anything that currently exists. Can you give us a little taste of what's not currently in publication that might be included in that?
It's kind of tricky because that is still a work in progress. I think there's such a vast amount of information out there which is yet to be put into one singular volume, mostly from the community,
Mm.
that what I'll be doing is basically asking the community, what do you want in there? What do you think is the most important techniques? So that will be where a lot of the collaboration comes in, is sort of this democratic process of
Yeah, I have been fascinated by what I call the DIY techniques, which I did an episode about, because of the fact or the apparent fact that not everything works for everybody. And it's kind of cool to see people experimenting in their own laboratory at home and coming up with techniques that work for them and then share it, on Reddit or on Dreamviews and letting other people try it as well and see if it works for them. Because there's always little
yeah.
just tricks or ways in which different people manage to get to that state. And you never know what actually would work for other people where everything else doesn't necessarily work for them. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Um, and one thing with the first book, it's not going to be limited to just the content of the book. There'll be an online component to this. So
Cool.
rather than take up all of the first book with technique after technique, which is just going to bore people to death, that a lot of that can exist in the online space. And I think maybe there'll be some kind of system involved of sort of an eBay rating system for each particular technique so that we can list them in order of
Oh, that's kind of
popularity and
cool.
effectiveness.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I know that people have done a lot of, every once in a while, a survey pops up on Reddit and other places, and I think those are potentially helpful if somebody can aggregate all of them together and get more information on what works for most people, and that would be a great way to at least rank them in terms of what you should try first.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, certainly it's a lot to take on as a project, but this is why I want to work with the community because it's not a one person job, and I'd be insane to take this on as one person, and it would be arrogant of me to do so. I don't have all the answers, and I probably never will. And there's a lot of lucid dreamers out there who know a lot more about different aspects of it than I do.
Yeah.
So it'll be nice to sort of work together as a body rather than these sort of independent cells just trying to be the center of attention. Um, but yeah, as you say with the forums, there's so much good information, but it gets lost over time because you have, especially with Reddit, you have these amazing high quality posts and really fascinating elements come up, and then they'll get buried under the usual sort of questions of was this a lucid dream, which comes up probably every hour, I
Yeah,
expect.
yeah, it's
Um,
it's kind of inevitable, but yeah, I
yeah,
hear you.
so it'll be nice to capture some of those ideas for all time rather than the sort of transitory nature of places like Reddit and Dreamviews, etc.
I like that. Well, we're coming up on an hour. I'm going to let you go in a minute, but there's another question that Mike said that I find interesting, and maybe you can give me some thoughts on this. Um, you said we have to see our dreams for what they are, both magnificent and mundane, all at once. He's asking, what are some of the ways you recommend that we approach dreams on their own terms and work with them? Because this is a fascinating aspect, and I think on the Kickstarter page you go into a little more details about it, where people often elevate everything to sort of high special spiritual experiences, when some of those cases, I think, I don't remember who it was, but somebody was pointing out that Freud was reducing everything to infantile stuff, and Jung
Yeah,
elevated everything to spiritual and important, where the truth is somewhere in between.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, you've almost answered the question there. It's that middle ground. I mean, there's one friend of mine who's a very talented lucid dreamer, and she is limited to almost every single lucid dream starts in the bathroom.
Hmm.
She just that's her cue, and I mean, it couldn't get more mundane than
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
your liftoff point being the bathroom, and it and the spiritual aspect as well. I mean, just because something feels deeply meaningful in a particular dream experience, you could say the equivalent of you might dream of winning the lottery. That doesn't mean you wake up with $1 million.
Right.
So, not all spiritual experiences are valuable. They might be moving, but not necessarily as true as they appear at the time. Um, I think it's finding that realistic human aspect to it because I think if we elevate things too much, then it puts people off or it makes them feel bad about themselves when their dreams are dreams of the bathroom or
Yeah.
dreams of trying to find something that they can't find. I mean, a lot of our dreaming experiences are just reflections of reflections and worries of our daily life, just repeated again and again. I mean, we've all had, especially when you've got the flu or some kind of illness, dreams of the hideous repetitiveness that can occasionally happen. And even the lucid dreams where your ability to control the dream is horrifically limited, again, that's not mentioned much. And it's nice to just accept that whilst there are these amazing heights that can be reached, that the majority of the experiences are going to be somewhat more human and more average. And that there's nothing wrong with that because that's what we are. But at the same time, it's kind of miraculous in its own way. There's nothing to be ashamed of by being a human being with
Yeah.
day-to-day concerns. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all still a miracle. We're still these amazing creatures living in this amazing,
Yeah.
marvelous universe. So the mundane is in itself magnificent, but let's not ignore that.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think that we haven't really figured out the whole process of meaning making in just creating meaning in day-to-day waking life.
Yeah,
So let alone when we have these experiences that are coming from probably a lot of the unconscious mind, or they're just abstract in nature and far more erratic, and we're trying to make meaning of those is much harder.
yeah,
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Well, Daniel, I'm really delighted that you came on the podcast and kind of getting to know you a little better. I really love your approach.
Yes,
I am now more excited about the Kickstarter campaign and this book now that
fantastic.
I have a better picture of it. It's really cool. I do want to mention that we're going to have you doing an AMA and Ask Me Anything on Reddit on the 19th of June.
Yep,
Sunday the 19th. It's 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and 7 p.m. British Standard Time.
yep.
Is that what it stands for? BST?
British summertime.
British Summertime.
Yeah,
Okay, I was very close.
yeah,
Yeah, so do you want to tell, I'm going to link to everything in the show notes, of course, but do you want to tell people where to find you and
yeah.
the Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, I'll do the embarrassing sort of pushing my stuff here. You can find me at exploringluciddreams.com, and the Kickstarter can be found at luciddreamersguide.com. But yeah, otherwise Google or look in the links below. That's probably the
Yeah,
easiest
yeah.
two
People can
things.
also search the Lucid Dreamer's Guide to the Cosmos on Kickstarter.
Yeah,
You're on Twitter on Are You
lucid
Dreaming?
under
Oh,
lucid
Lucid.
underscore dreaming, I think is the.
Yes,
I
Lucid
I
underscore
should know
Dreaming.
this off the top of my head, but I'm
Fantastic.
not much of a self promoter. I've always found it a bit embarrassing, but
Yeah,
yeah. But it's been an absolute pleasure. I've very much enjoyed talking to you.
yeah. Same here. Thank you so much. So I hope you enjoyed this interview. I thought it was very interesting, and I hope to continue to chat with Daniel in the future. And before I wrap up this episode, there's one thing I wanted to ask. I've been, if you've heard this podcast before, you know I've been looking into all sorts of ways to see what I can do with this podcast and how I can continue to support it. Checked into all sorts of ads and so on. And I've also realized that a lot of the podcasts that I love use the patronage model of sorts, including ones that I support, anywhere from Buddhist Geeks to the Waking Up podcast by Sam Harris and Dr. Rhonda Patrick podcast called Found My Fitness. So it occurred to me that I obviously have no problem supporting others in this way for podcasts that I love, and I thought it's worth a shot, and maybe I can put a Patreon page and see if people are willing to support the podcast one episode at a time. I think it's something like you can either put any amount or just $1 per episode or something like that, and I'm just going to give it a try. So if you're interested in supporting this podcast, other than just sharing it and your awesome feedback that I get in email and on Twitter, then you can go to patreon.com/luciddreaming to become a Patreon. I thank you very much for that. So that's it for our episode. Once again, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments, questions, concern, thoughts, poems, jokes that you want to send me, you can email me at contact@lucidsage.com. You can find me on Twitter always at @thelucidsage. And thanks, sweet and lucid dreams.